Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Stephen Nair and I'm the director of the Fortunoff Video Archive for Holocaust Testimonies, and it really is an honor for the archive to be hosting this event this morning to celebrate the enormous scholarly contributions of Professor Lawrence Langer and welcome the publication of a series of articles in his honor, in honor of his storied career and influence, entitled Interrogating Evil, a special issue of the Journal of Holocaust Research for Lawrence L. Langer on his 90th birthday. Larry's not only the most important living thinker and writer on the topic of Holocaust testimonies from the Fortunoff Video Archive, but he's also helped to build the archive, having served as an interviewer on over 80 testimonies recorded by the archive since the late 1980s. It's impossible for me to overstate the enormous influence Larry has had on the shape of this archive and its reception in the scholarly community, but I suspect other speakers today will address that much better than I can. I would like to make one tiny announcement that I think is relevant and I hope Larry will appreciate, and that is that I met recently with representatives of Yale University Press, and together we are discussing the creation of a multimedia version of Larry's book, Holocaust Testimonies, Ruins of Memory, which would combine the text of his groundbreaking work with the original excerpts from the testimonies upon which Larry based his research. In doing so, Ruins of Memory will not only continue to tell us about its own important insights that can be drawn from testimony, but it will show us those important insights. Larry, I hope to have it ready for you before your 92nd birthday, bis 120. So now I'd like to hand things over to Michal Aharony. Michal is the editor of the Journal of Holocaust Research and is a teaching fellow at Ben-Gurion University. She received her PhD in political science from the New School for Social Research in 2010. Her research and teaching interests include history of political ideas in modern political thought and Holocaust studies. She's the author of Hannah Arendt and the Limits of Total Domination, The Holocaust, Plurality, and Resistance from Routledge 2015, and numerous articles and chapters. Michal, you have the floor. Oh, don't forget to unmute, Michal.
Hi, can you hear me now? Hi, so hello everyone. Good morning. Here in Israel, it's already 5 in the afternoon. I'm very happy to be here in this special event to honor Professor Langer 90th birthday and his great contribution to Holocaust studies. I want to say just briefly a few words about the journal for the sake of people who don't know the journal. So the Journal of Holocaust Research, formerly known as the PIM, is the academic journal of the Weiss Livnat International Center for Holocaust Research and Education at the University of Haifa. It is published with a cooperation with Taylor and Francis publication, and we publish each year 4 volumes in English, and also once a year a bigger volume in Hebrew, so it's bilingual. And on behalf of the journal, I would like to take this opportunity to thank, first of all, Larry for giving us the opportunity to publish this special volume in his honor, and also for his beautiful article that he contributed for this volume. Second, I would like to thank the 3 guest editors, Don Scotiewski, Dan Stone, and Gabriel Finder. Thank you for your wonderful cooperation and for all the effort and hard work that made this special volume possible. For me personally, it was a great privilege to work with all of you, and of course to read Larry's piece and to work carefully on all the very interesting and great articles that all of you contributed. And we worked hard for over, I think, 1.5 years, and I'm very happy to be here tonight. And finally, I want to thank the Fortunoff Video Archive at Yale University for organizing this special event. So thank you, everyone, and I hope everyone will enjoy this webinar.
Thank you, Michal, and thank you, Stephen. I'd just like to say a few words on behalf of the editors. That's Dawn and Gabby and myself. First of all, we'd like to say thank you to the Fortunoff Archive for hosting this event, which of course would have been nicer in person, but such is life. We have to put up with this instead. But maybe at some point we'll be able to do something in person. But it's wonderful, Stephen, to hear of the plans for Larry's book. That's really exciting. And secondly, to thank Michal, because what she said is true. A lot of work has gone into this journal, and we as editors, I think, are extremely pleased with the results in the end. We've got a great range of articles, very different sorts of contributions, but all of them reflecting on and celebrating Larry's work. And that's the point. We're really happy to be able to present this collection to Larry, slightly late for his 90th birthday, only a year late, but you know, never mind, what's a year. So congratulations to Larry. And I'm now going to invite each of the contributors to speak very briefly for 3 or 4 minutes each, in the order that they appear in the journal, and then I'll invite Larry to respond. And then if there are any questions in the chat or in the Q&A, then I will read out as many as we can in the time that we have available to us. So I'd like first to ask Joanne Rudolph to speak. Joanne is the Laurel Fox Vlock Fellow at the Fortunoff Archive at Yale. Joanne.
Oops, unmute, Joanne. There we go.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Michal, and thank you, Stephen. Hello to the authors, most of whom I know, and a special hello to Larry. Hello also to everyone else who has taken the time to be with us for this wonderful occasion, even if only virtually. And thank you to the Fortunoff Video Archive for initiating and hosting this event. When I was approached on April 5th, 2019 to write this piece for the journal, I was first delighted to hear that my good friend and mentor extraordinaire, Larry Langer, was to be honored on the occasion of his 90th birthday with a special issue of the journal. Second, I was very pleased to be part of this effort. My journal article has a research focus documenting Larry's career, the history of the Fortunoff Video Archive for Holocaust testimonies, the connections between Larry and Fortunoff since 1984, and the symbiosis resulting in extraordinary intellectual and research impact since its beginning and continuing to the present and into the future. In contrast to the research focus of the article, today I will focus on the personal. Larry is extraordinarily generous in sharing his experience and his expertise. He is always willing to share his phone number with anyone interested in discussing his work, particularly with young scholars. He invites them to his home. He recommends to them what they should be reading and viewing. And even more important, he listens to their ideas and learns from them. I have always considered myself among one of the luckiest of those working in our field because of my mentors, my extraordinary mentors, Jeffrey Hartman, Sam Casso, Dana Klein, Sandra Rosenstock, and Larry Langer. No course, no degree program, no seminar could begin to cover what I have learned from all of them. In particular, Larry taught me how to view video testimonies. When I began this work, although each testimony had a huge impact on me, I was really at a loss in terms of seeing patterns and critical analysis. Larry's generosity in sharing his ideas contributed greatly to my own development as a scholar, as an archivist, as a documentarian, and as a writer. I dare say there are countless others who would say the very same thing. Larry's sense of humor, his optimism, his respect for others, and his ethics in terms of Holocaust survivors and testimonies. But equally important, his life, combined with his tremendous intellect, his insatiable curiosity and impulse to continually add to his knowledge, his wit, his incomparable writing, all combined to make him truly a giant in our field, not only in the academy, but in the world at large. His loving and close family are the focus of his life. My Zadig, my grandpa, would call him a mensch, a Talmud Chacham, and perhaps even a Lamed Vavnik. My Zaidi would also have me say to Larry today, Geh Gesundheit, be 120. Larry, I wish you many more simchas and many more great grandchildren, particularly seeing the immense joy that the babies, Dana and Maya, have brought to you. Larry, l'chaim.
Thank you so much, Joanne. That's a really a lovely way to begin. Can I next ask Jennifer Geddes to speak? Jennifer is a professor in the Department of Religious Studies at the University of Virginia.
Thank you. I am delighted to be here today and really honored to have been asked to contribute an essay to this special issue of the Journal of Holocaust Research. So many thanks to the editors, Don, Dan, and Gabi, for all your work in bringing the issue into being. And thanks to the Fortunoff Archive for organizing this event today. Like all of us here, I have learned so much from reading Larry Langer's work, learning that has influenced my writing and my teaching. I have seen the light of realization on my students' faces as they encountered his concept of choiceless choice and its implications for thinking about the Holocaust. I have seen them begin to understand their own temptations to domesticate the Holocaust after reading his descriptions of the ways we try to preempt, use, and abuse the Holocaust. And they have come to see the inadequacy of language in grappling with the Holocaust through his work. As Larry tells us, quote, the ghastly details of the Holocaust are a constant reminder of the abyss separating the lived experience of those who endured it from the language that seeks to describe it, end quote. In my essay, Consider If, Levy, Langer, Agamben, and the Unthinkable, I bring some of these things I have learned from Langer's work into conversation with Primo Levi's If This Is a Man, and Giorgio Agamben's Remnants of Auschwitz. Beginning with Charlotte Delbo's distinction between the worst and the unthinkable, I try to explore the unthinkable as marking not the impossibility of thought, but rather a space that requires us to engage in sustained reflection that refuses clear judgments or conclusions. I suggest that Levy's use of the hypothetical of if clauses creates such a space and commands us to engage in this kind of reflection. Specifically, I explore Levy's command that we consider if the men and women on the brink of exhaustion and death in the concentration camps, those who have been called the Musulmaner, are human. I suggest that this activity of considering if is one that must not come to a conclusion, that is characterized by hesitation, that requires a bracketing of conclusion. I then connect this mode of ongoing reflection in which judgment is bracketed to Langer's idea of choiceless choice, suggesting that it too calls for an ongoing attention and engagement with the testimonies of survivors, along with a bracketing of moral judgment. And finally, I turn to Agamben's meditation on the Musulman in Remnants of Auschwitz, arguing that while the book seems to be precisely this kind of reflection without judgment or resolution, Agamben actually fails to keep open the space of reflection, conflating victim and perpetrator in the process. Where Levy hesitates and Langer advises caution, Agamben advances conclusions. In the end, I suggest that the unthinkable, while sometimes functioning as a cliche, can also mark a space in which we are called to dwell, listen, and consider if, a reflection that cannot conclude or assert confident conclusions. I think this caution This willingness to continue to engage the ghastly details that cannot be fully understood is something that Langer's work has again and again taught me, and I am very grateful, and happy birthday.
Thank you, Jennifer. That's really wonderful, and also lovely comments to hear. So our next speaker is Sara Horowitz, who is a professor at the Scotiewski Center for Jewish Studies at York University. So, Sara.
Thank you. I'm going to echo my colleagues in thanking the editors of this volume and of the journal itself for bringing this into fruition. I know it's always difficult to wrangle essays into a cohesive volume as they have done, but I do want to suggest that their task was made a little bit lighter by the inspiration that the honoree has for all of us contributors. And I want to begin by briefly saying that in a field that's been dominated, and perhaps rightly so, by historians, the study of the Holocaust, Larry Langer is a luminary. He brought the tools and methodologies of literary scholarship to deepen and enrich thinking about the Holocaust. He's influenced people in a range of discipline with his rigorous, insightful, and powerful voice. He has not only teased out the subtleties and nuances of writing and testimonies about the Holocaust, but he's also been a steady critic of cultural misappropriations of the Holocaust and calling out as a kind of bad faith the tendencies to view the Shoah through a redemptive lens. His work has always been characterized by clear thinking and writing, by passion, and by a steady moral compass. I met Larry as a graduate student in the late 80s when I asked him at our first meeting whether everything had already been said about Holocaust literature. And I think Larry's own work since the late 70s is certainly evidence that it had not yet been already said. As I said, Larry's been a luminary in the field. For me, he's been more. He's been a generous mentor and truly a lifelong inspiration. And so happy birthday, and as we say in Yiddish, so lange Jahr, a very long life. I'm going to briefly summarize my contribution to the volume, which very much bears the imprint of Larry's insistence that we not look for redemptive narratives about the Holocaust. My article is a reading of the belated memoir Rue of the Nerf là-bas by the French philosopher Sara Kaufman, placed in the context of fictional and non-fictional accounts by writers who, like Kaufman, survived the Shoah as children. Kaufman was a child in Paris, born to immigrant parents from Poland who were Orthodox Jews. Her father was the rabbi of a Paris synagogue. He was tipped off in advance about what came to be called the Veldiv Rafla, and after warning his congregants, he returned home to his own apartment and waited to be arrested, hoping that in so doing he would buy time for his wife and 6 children. And indeed he did. He was murdered in Auschwitz, but the rest of his family survived. The memoir centers on a period of time when Sara, as a child, and her mother lived out the war sheltered by a French Catholic neighbor who took them into her apartment. More than 30 years after the liberation of Paris, Kaufman initiated the process to have her rescuer designated by Yad Vashem as one of the righteous among the nations. But her memoir focuses on what you might call the dark side of being a hidden child. It would appear that Sara is very lucky. She never was separated from her mother, and she lived out the war, as did all of her siblings. But the memoir focuses on the way her relationship with this woman and the increasing powerlessness of her own mother caused a stress, a break in the relationship with her mother, and a kind of attenuation of her relationship to Judaism as well. I put this in the context of writers like Appelfeld and Louis Begley, where we can see in the account of children during the Holocaust a kind of anti-Bildungsroman, in other words, a kind of undoing of the self, undoing of the foundations of the self, so that who they become later is severely marked by what they went through. The memoir was written in Sara Kaufman's 60th year and shortly before her suicide by gas. And it functions, in a sense, as a coda to her more abstract and intellectual work, published several years earlier, called Paroles suffoquées, or Smothered Words. There she asks, how can it be said and how can it not be said? In her work, I very much am indebted to Larry's insistence that we see not only what it is that people say in their writing, but also the things that they cannot say, and often that they cannot bear to think. So thank you, Larry, for being my moral compass.
Thank you, Sarah. More lovely comments. I see some common threads developing here, which I'll comment on a little later. Our next speaker then is Noah Schenker. Noah is based at the Australian Centre for Jewish Civilization at Monash University in Australia, and we're particularly grateful to him for being here since it's about 2 o'clock in the morning where he is. So Noah, if you're still awake, then we'd love to hear from you.
Though I write about artificial intelligence, I'm currently sentient. I just want to start by saying that though I've only known Larry for the last 6 or 7 years, I remember first meeting him at AJS, the Association for Jewish Studies. I believe it was in Baltimore. And I was just greatly intimidated by the prospect of meeting someone that had loomed so large for me. And I just recall the warmth and his generosity and his frank and honest views on everything, including my own work, which were just incredibly foundational to helping me pursue the path that I've been on. Though I first encountered Larry's work, and I remember exactly when it was, I had just decided upon a topic for my dissertation on the mediation of Holocaust testimony. And as a film and media scholar, I felt in over my head. I had read a great deal about the Holocaust. I had done work going back to my undergraduate career looking at representations of the Holocaust, but I just didn't have a sense of how to enter into this discourse. I needed a guide, and that guide ended up being Larry. To read his work was to open up just a whole world of possibilities for how I was to understand testimonies. I had a sense in terms of being a film and media scholar about how the space of the screen and the sound of the voice and the ways in which people perform and articulate, but I had no sense of the kinds of conventions and the narrative and rapport and all the aspects that went into the process. And when reading Larry's formative work, it opened up for me what ended up being the passion that drives my career. And I'm just forever indebted to Larry for that. And I'm indebted to the editors for inviting me, for giving me this ability to feel honored to be able to contribute to this volume. I'm a little emotional just because it takes me back to first encountering Larry's work and to his ongoing generosity and warmth that he's, and honesty. I cannot stress honesty and frankness when he has talked and we've talked about our ideas. My work for this volume, Disrupted Narratives, Lawrence Langer's explorations of deep memory and Holocaust testimonies, is a way of trying to trace Larry's influence, the ways in which he's been so foundational in foregrounding the importance of examining Holocaust testimonies, giving us the language, giving us a sense of the conventions, which is probably not the best term, but at least a sense of the textures and the contours of testimonies, and also really allowing historians and other scholars of the Holocaust to look at testimonies not just simply as primary documents, as primary sources, but as representations of other experiences, but as sources in and of themselves. In short, I think Larry, more than any other scholar, has demonstrated the interwoven nature of history and of memory as it makes its way in video testimonies. Whether it's, and I've continued to, whether it's the students that I supervise and constantly return in the classes that I teach to Larry's conceptualization of the choiceless choice. And what my work focuses in on is particularly his engagement with Charlotte Delbau's notions of deep and common memory, and the ways in which survivors express common memory, often in a chronological or coherent structure, recalling in the present moment how events unfolded in a compartmentalized past, and in contrast, notions of deep memory taking witnesses back to the events, reintroducing them to the range of senses experienced at the time, and complicating, and this is so foundational, complicating any efforts to keep that past at bay. And that Larry, more than any other scholar that I know, compelling us to engage the paradox that it is impossible to fully understand a witness, but that we must always try to understand a witness, that the impossibility and the obligation that must coexist in this endeavor has forever shaped our understanding of Holocaust testimony, and I think also of trauma more broadly, and I think and of genocides beyond the Holocaust by way of conclusion. And as I, speaking from Australia and starting to do work on the stolen generations of Australia, and as I've done work on Cambodia and teach on Rwanda and other genocides, to see Larry's conceptualizations and also his critiques of other ways of conducting testimonies that have been done by various archives across the world, to see how the debates that Larry had mentioned in regards to the Holocaust continue to inform in critical ways how we understand genocide and testimony well beyond the Holocaust. So Larry, thank you again for informing all of this work, for steering all of this work, and again to the editors for bringing his work again front and center where it belongs and as it always has been.
Thank you, Noah. Thank you for your powerful comments. Our next speaker is Dawn Scotiewski. Dawn is Professor of Literature at Brandeis University, and she's going to talk about the article which she and I have co-written for this special issue, which is on Jan Karski's testimonies. Dawn, over to you.
Thanks, Dan. I'll talk a little bit about the article, but first I just want to say a round of thank yous. W.S. Merwin's poem, Thank You, comes to mind. I don't know if you know it, but it's just thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. The first thank you has to go to Lawrence Langer. Larry, I am filled with emotion as I think about the many years now, I mean, almost a decade, but for me, it seems like a very long time that I've been working with you and talking to you about Holocaust testimonies. A couple of years ago, when you were about to turn 90, I remember talking with Dan and thinking, how could I ever repay you for all that I've learned from you and for all you've given to the field? And this volume, which I've so enjoyed working on with Dan and Gabi, has been a labor of love as well as an intellectual, a very gratifying intellectual experience. I first met Larry when I was giving a talk about Anne Frank and Eddie Hillesum at the Newton Public Library in Newton, Massachusetts. And he was in the audience raising his hand every so often, correcting the speakers about some errors in their delivery, things that they were saying. I was one of those speakers, and I was the one who was getting the most corrections, I think. And at the end of the talk, Larry came to the front of the room and he said to me, you know, there were a few things I didn't get to say that you missed in your talk that you're just wrong about. And I was thinking, oh my goodness, I was so taken aback. And I knew there were probably a lot of things, but I didn't know who this person was. And I didn't know how I was going to respond because the talk was over. And I said, well, you must know a lot about this. And he said, well, you know, I've written 11 books on the subject. And I said, oh, maybe I should know your name. He said, I'm Lawrence Langer. And I almost fainted. And I was standing in front of Lawrence Langer. And then almost the next thing that happened was he graciously invited me to come to his house and talk more about Holocaust testimonies. And we started watching Holocaust testimonies in his living room pretty much once a week. So I've spent, I don't know, over 100 hours watching testimonies with Larry and talking about so many different aspects of them. And so you can imagine just from those words, what that experience could be like. And then to have the opportunity now to work on this volume in his honor and to read the beautiful essays that you've all written and to see Larry's face as he listens to you. It's just such a pleasure. I'm not going to talk a lot about the article that Dan and I wrote, except to say that Dan and I met a few years ago, and one of our first conversations was about Larry Langer, about his work, and also about his interview with Jan Karski. I'm just going to show you a picture that appears in our article, and I'm sharing my screen here. It's a picture of Karski, and he's imitating FDR, and you'll see him right here. And Dan and I were talking about this, and I remember Larry telling me about this happening in the interview, and he said, you have to see this. This is his Shoah Foundation interview, and then Dan and I started comparing the Shoah Foundation interview with Larry's Fortunoff interview with Karski, and then with Claude Lanzmann's Shoah. And it was such a rich conversation, and the result of which is in this article. We conclude the article with this comment, which I think is so, it attempts to capture what Larry is about as a thinker and scholar. 30 years later, Langer's work helps us to correct a tendency to focus exclusively on the traumatic, the historical, or the performative dimensions of a recorded testimony. Instead, we must keep all these theories handy and at bay as we listen from moment to moment across the archives to the individual human being who endured great suffering and acted heroically. And in Karski's case, who insisted, I can't go back, in his interview with Lanzmann, only to do so again and again for these important archives. It was such a pleasure to work on this article with Dan. It went through a few iterations, and one of the most important parts of that was talking to Larry about the article. There's so much more I'd like to say as far as what a pleasure it's been to work on this volume and to work with Larry, but I'm not going to take up all of our time, and I want to thank you all for being here, and thank you, Stephen, for hosting, and thank you to the journal, and again, thanks to all the contributors, and finally, thanks again to Larry.
Thanks so much, Dawn. Well, just quickly to say that it was a pleasure to work with you two on that piece, and it's really an honour to have written it in Larry's honour. So the next speaker would have been Barry Langford, but he is not here. So I will just, as his colleague and friend at Royal Holloway, I will just advertise his article, and which is on film, American films, and the Americanization of the Holocaust, and is a brilliant piece which shows, as has already been said, how Larry's ideas, in this case about the Americanization of the Holocaust, were in many ways way ahead of their time, how in some ways they have been criticized by more recent scholarship, but he returns the argument full circle and goes back to Larry's ideas and shows why they're still important for continuing to understand American films about the Holocaust. So it's a really wonderful piece. So our final contributor is Gabby Finder, who's also, as you know, one of the co-editors. And Gabby's in the Department of Germanic Languages and Literature at the University of Virginia. So Gabby.
Thank you very much, Dan. I too have many thanks. I didn't know the poem by Merwin, but Dawn, please send it to me after the webinar. I loved what you said. First of all, I want to thank the Journal of Holocaust Research, formerly DAPIM. I want to thank Michal Aharony, who was our editor, who helped shepherd this volume to fruition. I also want to thank the administrative director of the journal, Anat Vina, who was extremely patient with us. It was a long process, but the product is very good, I think. I want to thank my guest co-editors for inviting me to join them. They were the ones who conceived the idea. I'm not sure why they asked me, but when they did, I was thrilled to join them, and it was really a joint effort and a labor of love. And so I want to thank Dan and Dawn so much for inviting me to be part of this. I want to thank the contributors to the special issue. Every contribution is special in its own way, and the issue covers such a wide range from literature, thanks to Sara, and philosophy, thanks to Jenny, and testimony, thanks to Noah, and Dawn and Dan's analysis of Karski's various testimonies, Barry's analysis of the Americanization of the Holocaust through film, especially through the film, which I love, Inglourious Bastards, but I now understand why I like it better, thanks to Barry's article. And for me also, I will speak about my own contribution in a few minutes, and I'm so glad that this was the opportunity I've been looking for to write about this particular piece. Thank you, Stephen, who I know is a new friend of mine. Thank you, Stephen, for hosting this and being a friend. I want to thank the Fortunoff Archives. Thank you, Joanne, for your wonderful tribute to Larry in your introductory essay. It really brings Larry's life to life. You know, instead of, we write a bit in the abstract, and Joanne brought Larry to life. Finally, I must thank Professor Lawrence Langer. He's meant a lot to me in my career. He doesn't know that, but he has meant a lot to me in my career. But I also want to talk about, I want to mention a personal story that is very important to me. Just briefly in my career, those of you who know me or know my work know that I've written a lot about Jewish honor courts, courts that Jewish communities established after the Holocaust to investigate fellow Jews accused of having dirty hands. And Larry's notion or concept of choiceless choice has meant a lot to me, as I have worked on this topic for years now and continue to work on it. In general, Larry's empathic and forthright approach to the Holocaust, to Holocaust testimony, has been an inspiration to me, and I've tried to emulate him. But I have a special personal story that I have to share with all of you, because it's been important to me and to my family and to my life, really. And Larry knows what I'm talking about, and Dawn knows what I'm talking about, Joanne knows what I'm talking about. So my father is with us today. My father and Larry are 2 months apart. I believe that my father is exactly 2 months older than Larry. Both are 91. My father, Herbert Finger, is with us today. My dad is a Holocaust survivor. My mother also and her family left Germany after the Night of Broken Glass, but my dad, with my grandfather, went through several camps as a boy, really. And for years, I tried to persuade my dad to give testimony, audio testimony. He once gave, in the 1980s, he gave testimony on a cassette tape to Nora Levine, and that actually, one can find that on the website of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. But you know, I wanted my dad to do what other survivors have done, so so important to give audio testimony. I couldn't persuade him, even though he has such an interesting story, because he always felt that younger people who would interview him wouldn't really understand him, couldn't understand what he went through. So he once said, if I could persuade him, find someone who would understand his story, he would do it. Well, I thought of Lawrence Langer, but I didn't really know Larry. And then it was at maybe the same AJS conference in Baltimore, to which Noah referred earlier. And after, Noah was even on that panel, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And Joanne was on the panel. My good friend Avinoam Pot was on the panel. And afterwards, I was scared to death, intimidated, because who am I? I'm just a minor scholar, and Larry is such a major scholar. He was on the panel. But anyway, I went afterwards and I said, we had met once before years ago, though he didn't remember me. I said, Professor Langer, you know, I admire your work so much, and my dad is a Holocaust survivor, and he's probably more or less your age, and he always said that he wouldn't give testimony. He has such an important story to tell, but he won't do it because he feels that younger people wouldn't understand him. And he said that you would understand him. Would you mind doing this? And this was about 5 or 6 years ago. And Larry was retired and lives in Boston. The Fortunoff Archive, of course, is in New Haven. I said, would you do it? And he said, without blinking an eye, he said yes. And it was about 5 years ago in the summer. I drove my dad from New Jersey to New Haven, and Joanne was very gracious to be there too. And Joanne and Larry interviewed my dad, and I just want to say, it was a couple of hours. Stephen was there in the control room. That's where I first met Stephen. And I just want to say that that testimony, I think it's, you know, it's important, but to my family and to me, it's a gift. You know, because it's something that I will always have. And my children, that's what really important to me. It's my children have it. And I will never forget how my children, when they saw that testimony for the first time, what an effect it had on them. And they saw it together with my dad. And it's etched in my mind forever. My daughter, or my child, even wants to write a music to it. So it's a gift to me and my family. And Larry, you've given me and my family a great gift. And I can never thank you enough for it. So I write about, my article is called, I'll speak about it very briefly. My article is called A Horrific Impression of Jewish Martyrdom Regarding Extermination of Polish Jews, Album of Pictures. And I write about an album of photographs called, it was a multilingual folio volume of photographs from the Holocaust. In Polish, it's called Zagłada Żydostwa Polskiego, Album Zdjęć. It's translated as Extermination of Polish Jews, Album of Pictures. It was published in 1946 by the Central Jewish Historical Commission in Poland. To the best of my knowledge, this is the first album of its kind published by a Jewish institution after the Holocaust. That is Holocaust of photographs. I'm not, everybody who knows me knows that I'm a dinosaur when it comes to these things, but I'm going to try to share my screen. Can you, whoops, wrong thing. Let's see, my son is here. Maybe he can help me. Hello, can you?
What are you looking for?
I'm gonna.
This one?
Yes.
Should just be.
No, wait, it's behind it. Oh, there it is. Can you see that? Does everybody see that? So that's the album that I used, and it's called, as you see. And now, can you bring me back to stop sharing? Right? Okay, so there I am, thank you. It's good to have a young person with me to help me with these things. My son is here helping me. So this album is, to the best of my knowledge, the first album of its kind, and it shows Holocaust, photographs from the Holocaust. And within 1 year after the end of World War II and the Holocaust, the Central Jewish Historical Commission in Poland had collected some 3,000 photographs from the Holocaust. The interesting thing, or the catch, is that most of the photos were taken by Germans. It says how they came into the possession of Jews after the war is an interesting story in itself. Many Germans took their lightweight cameras, they took photographs of every aspect of the Holocaust, you know, to mock Jews, to torment them. They show themselves having a grand old time tormenting and killing Jews. They had those photographs developed by Polish developers, even some Jewish developers in ghettos. They replicated them, they gave them to friends, and they were circulating throughout Nazi-occupied Poland and other places. And both Poles and Jews came into possession of many of those photographs, both during and after World War II and the Holocaust. The album, the majority of the photographs in the archives, photo archives of the Central Jewish Historical Commission were German-produced photographs. There were also some that were taken by Jews and even by Poles, but the majority of the photographs had been taken by Germans. And the album, which contains some 250 photographs, the majority of the photos in that album are German-produced photographs. And I, in my article, I discussed the dilemma that the Jewish Historical Commission and the editor of this album faced, and that was they wanted to produce an album of photographs from the Holocaust. They wanted to evoke moral outrage among an international community, but they were stuck with a majority of photographs from the German perspective of what scholars call the German gaze. And I make the argument in my article that the editor, hello, can you help me for a second again? So I want to just show you the, let's see if,
Which one?
It doesn't work. I want to show this.
Sorry. Which one is it?
This one.
Hold on.
Oh,
Hold on. And then...
Oh, there it is. Can you all see that? It's good to have a 20-year-old son in college who can help with these things. Anyway, this is the editor of the album, Gershon Tafet, who himself was a Holocaust survivor, who survived the liquidation of his ghetto Żółkiew, who also survived the Janówka, the infamous, notorious Janówka labor camp outside Lviv, who lost his wife and daughter, and then after the Holocaust joined the Central Jewish Historical Commission and became the director of its photo archive, or one of the directors, and the editor of this volume. So I'm back. So I argue that even with the inherent limitations of these photos in mind, Tafet and his colleagues on the Jewish Historical Commission decided to produce this volume because they wanted, their aim was to bring an international mass audience closer to the horrors of the Nazi persecution and murder of Jews. Now, I show a few of these photographs in my album, in my article. I don't want to, I decided not to show the most horrific and the worst of the photographs, but I do want to show, I did show one, a so-called buddy picture, and I'm going to ask my son Hillel, this one, can you show that one, please? Yes. No, they haven't, no, this one. There it is. Can you see that? Yeah, so that is a photograph of Reserve Police Battalion 101. And all of you in the field know it from Christopher Browning's book, Ordinary Men. This was the Reserve Police Battalion that was at the center of Christopher Browning's investigation in his classic book, Ordinary Men. And this is a photo. I published this photo in my article. It's Reserve Police Battalion 101 after a ghetto roundup and deportation of some 1,000 Jews in the ghetto of Międzyrzec Podlaski in the Lublin district in Poland. They were deported to Majdanek on May 26, 1943. And it's a gleeful, in it you see the gleeful members of Reserve Police Battalion 101 pointing to the spoils that they took from the Jewish victims that they had just deported to Majdanek. And you know, it's so hard to divine what the motivation of these men were. And Christopher Browning, in his most recent volume, third edition, revised edition of his book, Ordinary Men, points to the fusion. When we try to understand motivation, we should think about the synergy between situation and ideology. And I agree with that for the most part. But I think what this does also show, this picture shows that, and the other pictures that appear in the album show what I just call in my article, the creation of a permissive environment, a de facto open season on Poland's Jews, in which men in this battalion could torment, deport, and kill Jews with impunity. And I borrow a phrase from my colleague and good friend, Alon Confino. His book is called A World Without Jews. It seems to me that the photographs that appear in this album from 1946 display an attitude among the Germans who took them that they could imagine a world without Jews. That's the argument that I make. But there's more to the album than just that. At the end of the album, the editor, Gershom Taffet, inserted a few photos taken by Jews that extol Jewish resistance. And I argue that it's an attempt to subvert the so-called German gaze in the album with the Jewish gaze. And I just want to show you one more. Could you show, thank you.
Is it this one?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, hold for tech.
Hey, Gabby.
Yes, I have 30 seconds.
This one, right?
Okay,
Yes.
great.
Thank you.
Oh, that's not right.
This one. Yes, okay, does everyone see that? And that's a photo collage that was made in the Lodz ghetto in 1941 by a survivor who took the name in Israel, Aryeh Ben Menachem. It's called Psheter Vami, it means we shall survive. So this is how the album ends. It ends on a hopeful note, but I just want to say that I also am a great fan of Larry's work, and I am, of course, familiar with his concept of unheroic memory. And I just want to say that even though it ends on a hopeful note, the whole album, though, is permeated by this idea of unheroic memory. So there's this tension in the album between ending on a high note and attestation of the horror that befell Polish Jews during the Holocaust. Thank you very much, and I want to thank everyone for the contribution to the special issue.
Thank you so much, Gabby. Good, okay. Well, that's all the contributors. I just wanted to add a little personal note, which is that, like many others, I met Larry for the first time when I was a postdoc in the mid-90s, was also rather intimidated because, of course, you know, he was Lawrence Langer, and it wasn't so many years since I read the Holocaust Testimonies book and was kind of overwhelmed. And Larry paid me the great honor of taking me seriously and treating me like a peer, and he read parts of my doctorate and we talked about it, and made me feel as though I was an equal and had a contribution to make. And it was really wonderful. It was extremely important for me at that point in my career to be treated like that by somebody like Lawrence Langer. So my own personal thanks as well to add to those of everybody else's. And on that, I would like now to invite Larry to respond, to say a few words, whatever you like. Over to you.
Well, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
You can hear me. All right. Well, I have about 100 things to say and only time to say about 5 of them. Before I forget, Gabby, it's very nice to have a 20-year-old son to help you with things. My friend, it's even nicer to have a 63-year-old son who is a grandfather to help you with things. So be prepared. You have a great future ahead of you. My son is my right arm and my left arm. Unfortunately, I wish you hadn't said one thing, and it had to be echoed by Dan. My entire adult life, my wife has been asking me, why do you intimidate people so much? And I tell her, me, you know, nicest guy in the world, I never intimidate anyone. The minute this webinar is over, my wife is going to charge into my office and say, you see, not only did you intimidate Gabby, you intimidated Dan, you know, own up to it. Well, it's still not true. Now, my young friends, let me tell you something. You made the mistake of saying, well, this Festschrift is a little late, just a year off, but what's in a year? Be prepared, be prepared. When you reach my age, there's a lot in a year. Now, in writing my essay, which I'm not going to talk about, My Life, Holocaust, Death, I was reminded of something that I hadn't thought about before. When I visited Dachau in 1955, Raoul Hilberg was a graduate student. Christopher Browning was in junior high school, and this blows my mind more than anything. My late in life dear friend Wendy Lauer was not even born. And so I've had to deal with this issue of the passage of time. Now, there is no point in my repeating the thanks to everyone. You again and again thanked everyone. I just want to mention, I'm sure I have no idea how much time and energy Dan and Dawn and Gabby must have put into preparing this volume. I would like to add one thanks, which no one would mention because they didn't know what to mention. The cover of this print, the in-print festschrift, is a painting by the child survivor of the Vilna Ghetto, Samuel Bach, called The Creation of Adam. And I would like to thank Bernie Pucker of the Pucker Gallery in Boston for giving permission to use that painting. And I hope those of you who will be getting a copy of the print version will look at that painting, because it's Sam Bach's post-Holocaust version of Michelangelo's famous version of the creation of Adam on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. And when you look at the Adam, you have to ask the question that Primo Levi asked, is this a man? And not only that, when you look at the image of God in that painting, you have to ask the question, which is asked less often, is this a God? So that painting really creates a kind of introduction to that volume. Now, I read each of these essays twice, and it was extraordinary. The second time through, I realized things I didn't read the first time through, that these are such serious investigations of such a variety of issues. And I just offer my heartfelt thanks to all of you for contributing to this volume. One of the things I noticed, and I don't have time to talk about it, is that there's a kind of interaction, unintended of course, because you hadn't read each other's contributions, relationship between some of these essays. Just imagine, Dawn and Gabby, if Jan Karski had been able to walk into the office of President Roosevelt carrying Gabby's volume under his arm and trying to get President Roosevelt to understand what he's trying to tell him when he went in and looked at the condition of the Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto. Incidentally, Gabby, I want you to think about one thing. Neither in your essay or in your presentation now have you shown us a picture of one of these atrocity photographs. And I'd like you to think about why. Because we need to see them. And I hope you will, in an email, tell me, how can I get a copy of this? None of the libraries that I've checked in have a copy. I don't even know if we have them here. Now, what I appreciated most about these essays is that instead of answering questions, they raise questions, all kinds of questions, that have no answers, and even maybe unanswerable. And I want to only show two examples of that in the essays. Jennifer, in her wonderful essay on Primo Levi, writes the following, just one sentence. Considering if something is so is not a questioning that produces an answer. Rather, it is a dwelling with a painful reality that cannot be resolved and brackets judgment, requiring our continued attention, time, and ongoing reflection, even though it can't be resolved. I think it's a gem of a sentence, Jennifer, and thank you for it. The other really moment that concentrates in a sentence is in Sara's essay. And Sara, thank you so much. I never heard of Sara Kaufman in my life before you mentioned her. And for some reason, my local library had a copy of her book, which I took out, and thank God it was only 80 pages, so I read it. I'm currently reading the new biography by Volker Ulrich of Adolf Hitler. Each one weighs about 10 pounds. Each one is about 800 pages long. And just imagine, I mean, Hitler came to power, was it 83 years ago. And in 2020, this year, volume 2 came out, full of information that hadn't been used before. So this subject is not dead and will never die. So let me read you just that other sentence from Sara Kaufman's book. Because he was a Jew, my father died in Auschwitz. How can it not be said? And how can it be said? How can one speak of that before which all possibility of speech ceases? Now, behind that line, there exist questions which will never have an answer, because she found out later what happened to her father. Her father, a rabbi, an Orthodox Jew, refused to work on the Sabbath. So as a punishment, the Germans buried him alive. And I asked myself, these are the questions that rise. Who gave that order? Who dug that hole? What were the onlookers thinking while it was happening? And what was her rabbi father thinking as the dirt piled up around him? These are questions raised by the Holocaust for which we don't have answers, but for which we are obliged, about which we are obliged to think. I have a lot of reflections on that, but you know, we've gone more than an hour. I just want to say one more thing, and then I'm going to stop because there may be questions, and we need to allow time for that. I watched the interview many years ago, at the Fortunoff Archives, from a man who told his story. At the very end, the interviewer made what I consider to be a mistake of asking him, do you have any final comments that you'd like to offer us? That is usually an invitation for a little moral homily about the need to be good to people and be kind and not to bully and so forth. That's not what he did. He says, all my life, he says, I've been haunted by a question. And this is the note on which I'd like to end. What was the question? He said, what happened to my mother when they killed her? Was she alone? Was she with other people? Was she afraid? What was she thinking? I'll never know, he said. I'll never know. So an important dimension of Holocaust studies, and it happened in so many of these essays, is exposing questions for which there is no answer and for which we are nonetheless obliged to continue searching for one. So I hope you young people, and I say that from my position as someone who's now going on 92, will carry on with this kind of work. It's almost inconceivable that we're approaching a century from the time when Hitler came to power, and essays like these are still being written, and I hope they will continue to be for a long, long time. I mean, I bless you all for paying such attention to what I've done. You can't imagine how good this all makes me feel, and being friends and not people I've intimidated, but being friends has meant so much to me, and just looking at you fills my heart with warmth. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Larry. It's an enormous honor and a pleasure for all of us, I think, to hear your words. And we're not intimidated anymore. We were just reflecting on the early days. It's really wonderful to hear what you say. And I think I'm speaking for myself, what you say about asking questions that cannot be answered really goes to the heart of things, I think, and particularly for historians who like to answer questions. In this subject, it's extremely important to remember, I think, what you've taught us, which is that there is no redemptive message to be gained from studying the Holocaust. and that there are no final answers in history or in any other respect. And I think that's an enormous contribution, and continues to be something that has to be repeated over and over again, particularly given the state of public engagement with the Holocaust and some of the immense banalizations that take place on a daily basis. So we're all immensely grateful to you for your work. And I will also finally add here a little advertisement, which is that Larry was too modest to mention that another collection of his own essays will be published in the new year with Palgrave. So we have more of Larry's work still to look forward to.
And it's called it's the After Death of the Holocaust is the title.
The After Death of the Holocaust, coming to a bookshop.
February.
Thank you, Larry. Stephen, do we have time to take a question?
Of course.
There's actually one here, Larry, that you might like to respond to, which I don't know, we don't have a name. An anonymous attendee says, the great presence of some art, for example, the art of Samuel Bach, in your writing since 1995. Please comment. And you already have, obviously, on the painting which adorns the cover of the journal, but I wonder if you'd like to say any more about Samuel Bach's work.
Yes. I came late in life to the work of Sam Bach. We have now done 11 volumes together. He does a series of paintings and I write a long essay, and Bernie Pucker, through his wizardry, managed to get the volumes published. I'll just say 2 or 3 sentences about Sam, because this is not really about Sam, but along with Felix Nussbaum, they, for me, are the 2 great artists of the Holocaust. So, Sam tries to present visually the way the Holocaust has fractured our world in the years after the war. It's a unique contribution to the world of art. He should be better known, but I mean, people tell me again and again, I can't hang a painting like that in my living room because I have to look at it. Well, it's like looking at the photographs in Gabby's volume. We can't look at it, but we have to look at it. But if you're interested in pursuing the work of Sam Bach, and it's certainly worth pursuing, just go on to pucketgallery.com, go into artists, go into Samuel Bach. You'll be able to see a lot of his paintings. They're really worth investigating.
Thank you, Larry. There's a comment here from Wendy Lauer. It's nice that Wendy's here. And Wendy says she wants to pay tribute to your work and cites one particular sentence that you've written. When human beings cease to be emissaries or legatees of love and become instead agents or victims of power on such a massive scale, we may have witnessed a shift in civilization's priorities, with whose psychological bequest we continue to struggle. Would you like to comment or leave it as it stands?
Ask me November 4th and I'll comment on that.
All right, I understand. In that case, Stephen, do we want to draw things to a close?
I think so. There was one other question about how to obtain a copy of the journal. I don't know if you want to just say a few words about how to get a copy of the journal.
Well, of course, for those with institutional subscriptions to Taylor and Francis journals, it can be obtained through your institutional library. I think for those who don't have access to a university library, perhaps if you go to maybe Michal can comment, but perhaps if you go to the website of the Journal of Holocaust Research, you'll be able to see what access options there are there. But perhaps you could also email Michal Aharony and ask her about that as well. Otherwise, I think that's all the questions. So it just falls to me to say thank you to the contributors again. Thank you to Stephen and to Fortunoff Archive. Thank you to Michal and the Journal of Holocaust Research. And most of all, thank you to Larry. We're deeply honored to be able to celebrate your work in this way. Wish you a happy birthday and many more to come. Thank you.